to creating within number 2. This one we're going to be stepping it up a notch and kind of placing in a real-world situation as an artist or an illustrator, working with a client who has certain demands and certain things he wants in his drawing or his painting. So what we've done is we've inquired at learnairbrush.com and gotten some mixed samples of interest from some of our members. And what I've done is I've taken some of that stuff and I've spent some time sketching to create a real-life situation, and also creating an image that was satisfactory for me artistically, something that I would enjoy, having fun with the elements provided to create something that is going to be a unique piece. And different from what we've done in the past, this one is purely going to rely on your own creativity to create these images. We're not providing masks like we have with the Belly Gun series. We really want to help stimulate the creative thinking process and how to execute it in your painting, working with different variables like contrast, lighting, focus of subject, environment, and many other aspects of good, well-designed painting. So that's our focus for number 2. I started with basically a pencil sketch. From there I digitally photographed it and I brought it into a painting program, which allowed me to enhance it and do a quick study on certain things like areas of contrast and where I was going to have more focus, and it just gave me a chance to kind of mess around and get a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do with the painting before I actually stepped up with the airbrush and put paint in it. I started off with a simple pencil sketch, then I went in with a Sharpie and then reinforced some of the values that I really wanted to emphasize to create the contrast as well as the sense of perspective. From there, I took my pencil sketch and I scanned it in to Corel Painter, and I did a lot of digital work, just real quick airbrushing effects and stuff like that, just to kind of emphasize and just to give me a chance to evaluate everything before I went ahead and started this monochromatic project. Okay, I'm just finishing up some of my sketch work here, just using the rendering I worked up inside of Corel Painter. And the most important part is, a lot of times when you're doing these gestural drawings, things that are real loose, you capture a lot of dynamics that are, kind of just subconscious when you're first putting together your concept. So it's really important that when you go from your sketch to your final piece, that you're still able to capture those dynamics that inspired you enough to go beyond just having a sketch and actually doing the painting. So that's what we're doing right now, just making sure our layout, our proportion, and everything's fine. You can use a pencil grid over top of something like this to proportionately lay out a grid to help you out with some layout. You could use a projector. You could use the vinyl mask to go in and trace it out. But for this one, we pretty much just wanted to do it just with traditional painting methods, using the airbrush, pencil, and some loose hand shielding. Now that we've got all the sketch work done, we're gonna start with our white and focus on the highlights. I'm not gonna go through and trace everything out and then wipe down the pencil. I'm actually gonna start in little areas, and I'll just wipe out the pencil as I work around, because it is such an involved layout. I do want to try to keep this stuff down here as long as possible, but I'll just be working in sections and removing the guidelines with the Stabilo as I'm completing the painting. I'm going to start going in and reinforcing a lot of the line work that I did with Stabilo. Initially just kind of tracing around my work as I'm going. But at the same time, I'm going to start putting in some volume and some of the initial shadows and highlights and stuff that will be formed just with the white. As soon as I get everything kind of penciled in, I'm just going to go in and wipe it out. Now I can start focusing on more of some of the detailed work that I would be worried about getting wiped out before we took out our Stabilo. I'm going to emphasize some of these lines here and set up some of the major highlights off the edge of the pieces, and it'll kind of cue me into where some of the other lighting and dominant light sources will affect the shapes of the objects we're painting. Keep in mind that we're not painting a flat object here when we're working with these arm braces and the knuckles and the hands and the arms. Everything's somewhat rounded or based off of almost a cylinder. So with some of the lessons we talk about with the dominant light source and secondary, keep that in mind as you're illuminating these things. And obviously the more metallic objects like the wristbands and stuff like that are going to reflect the light much more than the flesh on the skin. A lot of little dagger strokes to create these reflected light sources on the bands. And then inside the flesh, we're using a much softer stroke. Notice how much further away from the surface I am, and I'm allowing those tones and values to build up very slowly to create the softer effect of the skin. This type of airbrush work complements the real tight stuff that's done on the armature and the armored pieces on our character here. And working with the different types of levels of intensity and application are all very crucial.
Really important when we talk about the concept of creating from within, that you understand what it is you're trying to paint, what type of surface it is. Is it a highly reflective surface? Is it a matte surface? These things are all, pretty much little bits of information that you need to catalog, into your actual working, vocabulary as an artist to create things from, inside your own imagination. Looking at reference photos and everything's good when you need to, but the important part is that you understand what it is you're looking at. Why is it that you're looking at it? Why is it you see it the way you see it? These things, for me throughout the years, I've kind of cataloged them and, tried to absorb them as much as possible. But it's important that you exercise them as well as acknowledge them.
Use a series of very tight dagger strokes, and oftentimes the heaviest part of the stroke is going to be kind of related to where the most intense aspect of the lighting is coming in from, and then from there it'll taper off. You'll see me do that all through this little section here on her shoulders. The sense of perspective on this skull is very important to pull it off in the environment that it's in and the position that it is on her body. So, working with objects, and make sure you have them skewed properly when you're assembling them inside your composition. Okay, again, we're working with a very highly reflective surface here with the bikini top, shall we say. And I'm going to emphasize that by adding a very extreme amount of light to help portray its brilliance from the reflection. And also the edges and stuff that we're going to be working off of this stuff are going to be highly reflective and help tell the tale that this is a reflective, metallic-like piece of material.
I like to stop and emphasize some of the differences between like the metal bands that are on her arm, the highly reflective surfaces they have, in comparison to the softer, smoother transitions of the highlights on the flesh. You'll notice how soft and everything is, and it's not going to have the relative brilliance that the highlights on these metal objects will have. You also see some really sharp dagger strokes that basically come down to being a very small flood stroke that help emphasize that, help create the illusion that you're looking at something that is highly reflective, as well as a piece of metal or, you know, steel or chrome plated. Also, here on the Dagmar for the bra, we focus on some of the extreme highlights on there, as well as the concept of the shadow. Where is the shadow remaining? Where is the light on the forearm and the shoulder here? You know, these things to help create the effect of this thing being rounded rather than a flat object just defined by line. So it's more important that you're focused on where your highlights are and leaving behind this core shadow. Same thing down here. We're going to have a little bit of reflected light come out the back side of the inner arm coming off this, and little things like that that you can use along the way to help create the illusion of this thing actually, you know, looking somewhat realistic. Okay, I'm going to start the torso now, and keeping in mind where a lot of the reflected light's coming in from the side here. And as we come across the top, I'm going to start to capture the fullness of the abdomen. Okay, I'm doing the torso here, and you know, keep in mind as we're discussing where our lights are coming in from, the interactivity with the lights in the background, where these cars are kind of like coming to life, and you'll get a lot of the strong reflected light here coming off the edges of the body of the torso here. But we also are going to be leaving the space in these darker areas right here that basically the core shadow, where the lights are interacting, going around the curvature of the torso. Now we're going to move on down through here into the legs, and you'll see some more reflective stuff as we kind of get into her bottom garment there. Chastity belt, shall we say. A lot of the reflective stuff here is just going to be done with very small dagger strokes, and you know, oftentimes when we're trying to describe the process, it becomes somewhat redundant and repetitive, but it's very necessary to break things down into very simple form and execution of stroke. You don't want to have to keep coming back in, countering, going back in to try to create this effect. So a lot of this can be done initially just with the white, and it doesn't have to be added into that much to maintain the effect you're going after as far as it being a reflective metallic-like surface. A lot of the strokes on the chastity belt are somewhat uniform in size and shape, and it becomes almost a repetition of movement when you're doing these things up a linear line with the little highlights and little dagger strokes, and it's a little easier once you get into a certain rhythm and pattern. Right now I'm just going to lay out some of the basic proportions in the face, get the placement, the eyes. In this particular scene, the hair is going to be draping over to one side as well as being more shadowed off this side here. But what I'm going to do for effect is to have her eye kind of glowing from behind her bangs, and it'll create some interesting lighting. It's
Just gonna lay out the mouth open. I'm going to start with some of the facial details and just kind of mark them in place just with the white almost as an outline. Here we're going to start with the mouth, the lips, and the teeth. And I'm going to go ahead and get some of the details in the highlights in the mouth. Keep in mind where your light source is, and obviously think in terms of the face as being a very large sphere of sorts as far as the overall lighting, but there's a lot of subtle differences in the planes and the shapes in the face, and using a reference for something like this wouldn't be a bad idea if you're not that familiar with the anatomy and you want to learn more about it. Certainly is the best way to do it. Having done this for a few years, it's become a little bit less challenging for me to create a human form without a reference. I'm going to go for the effect of the light coming from the eyes, and so that's going to create some interesting stuff as well. Working in the hair is a series of dagger strokes. It's always challenging creating a face, from your imagination. The things that are important are the basic proportions, as well as the lighting and the rendering that you got going on to coordinate with the rest of the story you're trying to tell with your painting. She's going to have a pretty sinister looking face when I get done. The white's setting up pretty well, and then a lot of the hair is going to kind of shade the other side of her face, and all you're going to capture is just a little bit of the eye peeking through the bangs. So we're going to keep working on down here through the neck area, working a little bit of the hair, and also finish up her right hand. I'm going to add a little bit more brilliance to some of the effect off the edges here that are going to help kind of tie in the effect of the eye kind of glowing. I'm also going to make sure that I've got enough brilliance in the face. I want it to be very pale and a part of the effect of what I'm going after here with this image. You can see I'm bringing up some of the highlights being affected on the top of the bands as well as the arm. Now I'm going to start laying out the hand on the other side on her right arm. And I'm going to start with some of the pencil lines, just kind of going around emphasizing the shape for now, just to cue me into where the lighting is going to go. Breaking up a proportion where the knuckles will kind of bend over the wrench, I created a little axis line there you've seen, and that's going to become basically the high point of the knuckles on that hand. Okay, I've got a lot of the rendering done here in the body, the face and stuff, and what I'm going to do is kind of just go in and touch up a couple things. It's nice to get away from your work periodically when you're doing something this involved. Gives you a chance to step back and then come back in and take a look at what's really happening. So what I'm going to do is come in here and bring up some of the values and the brilliance and the white, and basically create the amount of focus with the amount of light here. Things will get a little bit darker as they get into the background. So I want to make sure I have that all in place before I start moving into the foreground and some of the stuff in the background. As I'm working the hair, I'm going to take into consideration how the light's obviously affecting some of the groupings in the hair, the clusters. I don't render it, as a hair follicle by hair follicle type of illustration. I kind of create these flowing groups of hair. And as we go around the edge of the hair and into the background, there's going to be stronger contrast. So at this point in time, I'm going to start setting that up and fading the light out away from the focus of our character off the edge of the hair. You can see how the addition of the light in the background really pushes the contrast of the image forward. Now I'm going to start setting up some of the elements in the middle ground directly behind her. The Ford that's kind of like tilted on a pile of cars, almost with the tension like it's going to fall right on top of her. And you know, you could spend as much time on your conceptual rendering as you actually would painting. You know, don't feel like you have to be locked into what you've done, but you know, spend the time on the important things like the composition, the contrast, the focus, and a lot of the dynamics that you're trying to capture with your painting. I'm trying to create a lot of instability here with these cars at these angles. I'm wanting to almost make them feel like they're gonna fall in on our main figure here. And so that's gonna add some interesting dynamics to that as far as what's going on in the background. These are the things that I plan on and spent a lot of time working conceptually before I started doing this. So I guess